Her own father arrived not to save her, but to demand she give away her unborn child to save the family's name. Abandoned at the altar and left for dead in a coming blizzard, a pregnant woman surrenders to her fate. But destiny leads her to a giant rancher, an outcast feared by the entire town, a man with his own dark secrets. To protect her, he would have to defy them all, sparking a war for honor, for survival, and for a love neither of them ever dared to dream of. The silence in the small chapel of Solitude Creek was heavier than the timbered beams overhead. It pressed down on Clara Mae Thompson, a physical weight that stole the air from her lungs. She stood before the altar, a transplanted Philadelphia librarian in a simple muslin dress, her hands trembling around a small clutch of winter primrose. The sky outside the single stained-glass window had turned the color of a fresh bruise, and the wind carried the sharp bite of imminent snow. This was supposed to be the beginning of her life, not the end of it. The preacher, a man with a face like worn leather, cleared his throat for the third time. He looked from Clara to the man beside her, Silas Croft. Silas hadn't moved. He stood ramrod straight, his handsome face a mask of cold porcelain, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the altar, as if she wasn't there at all. The townspeople packed into the pews had ceased their shuffling. The silence was absolute now, a collective held breath. "Son?" the preacher prompted, his voice thin. "The vow." Silas finally turned, but not to the preacher. His gaze fell upon Clara, and for a fleeting, foolish second, she felt a surge of hope. Then she saw the contempt in his eyes, cold and clear as ice on a winter stream. He let his gaze drift pointedly down to where her hands rested protectively over her abdomen, a secret she had confessed to him in tearful trust only 2 nights before. He spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the silent chapel with chilling precision. "I will not." A collective gasp rippled through the pews. The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of broken glass. Silas took a step back, a deliberate, formal separation. "My father did not raise me to welcome another man's shame into the Croft family. This union is finished. Shame." The word struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. She could feel the stares of the townspeople, the women who had offered tight-lipped smiles, the men who had tipped their hats with grudging respect. Now she was just a spectacle, a fool from the East, pregnant and cast aside. She saw Silas's mother in the front pew, a smug, triumphant smirk just barely gracing her lips. It was then Clara knew this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated execution. Clara didn't cry. The humiliation was too deep, too cold for tears. She simply turned. Her movements were stiff, robotic, as she walked back down the aisle she had just walked up, filled with naive hope. No one met her eyes. They studied their shoes, the hymn books, the wooden floorboards, anything but the woman at the center of the wreckage. The heavy oak doors of the chapel groaned open, and the wind tore at her, whipping her veil from her hair and sending it skittering across the frozen ground. She didn't stop to retrieve it. She just walked. Then her walk broke into a desperate, stumbling run. Away from the whispers, away from the judgment, away from the life that had just crumbled into dust. She ran without direction, following a desolate wagon trail leading out of town and into the vast, unforgiving Wyoming wilderness. The first flakes of snow began to fall, tiny and sharp, stinging her tear-streaked cheeks. Her simple dress, meant for a celebration, was now a flimsy shield against the ever-increasing cold. The wind howled, a mournful sound that echoed the emptiness inside her. She didn't know how long she walked, her feet numb, her mind a maelstrom of Silas's cruel words. There was no purpose, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the chapel. But the blizzard was a relentless hunter. The snow came faster, thicker, blurring the trail and swallowing the world in a swirling vortex of white. Her strength finally gave out. She stumbled, falling to her knees in a deepening drift. For a moment, she tried to push herself up, but the fight had left her. A strange, peaceful weariness settled over her. It would be so easy to just close her eyes. As the world faded to a soft, cold white, she placed a hand on her belly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the life within, her last conscious thought before the darkness and the snow claimed her completely. The blizzard was a white beast, roaring through the pines that bordered Elijah Blackwood's land. He was tracking a stray mare, her tracks already fading under the relentless assault of the snow. It was a fool's errand, but the horse had belonged to his late wife, Lillian, and he would not let the storm take her. He rode with his head bowed against the wind, a giant of a man hunched on a horse nearly as large, moving through the white chaos with a grim familiarity. It was then he saw it. A patch of white that didn't belong. A fallen birch branch where no birch grew. He reined his horse to a stop, his keen eyes narrowing. As he dismounted, the shape resolved itself. A woman, a drift of muslin and pale skin, already half buried by the snow. He moved quickly, his long strides eating up the distance. He knelt, his gloved hand brushing the snow from her face. It was the librarian from Philadelphia, the one who was to marry Silas Croft. He'd seen her in town, a delicate creature who looked as out of place in Wyoming as a songbird in a hawk's nest. Her skin was icy to the touch, her lips a faint, alarming blue. But when he pressed his fingers to her neck, he felt it. A pulse, faint and thready as a spider's silk, but there. Without a word of judgment, without a moment's hesitation, Eli gathered her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing. He wrapped her in his own thick wool coat, shielding her from the wind's fury as he carried her back to his horse. The journey to his ranch house was a battle against the elements, but it was a battle Eli knew how to fight. His property, the Blackwood Timberline Ranch, was set deep in a valley, a fortress of hand-hewn logs and riverstone, built to defy the very worst of a Wyoming winter. Inside, a great stone fireplace dominated the main room, its embers still glowing. He laid Clara gently on a thick bearskin rug before the hearth, adding logs until a roaring fire pushed back the room's chill. He worked with a quiet efficiency, removing her frozen shoes and stockings, chafing her hands and feet until a hint of color returned. There was a quiet strength in his movements, a gentleness that belied his formidable size. He left her for only a moment, returning with a steaming mug and a heavy quilt. Clara woke slowly, drifting up from a deep, cold darkness into a cocoon of warmth. For a blissful instant, she knew nothing but the soft weight of a quilt and the crackle of a nearby fire. Then, memory returned like a physical blow. The cold chapel, Silas's voice, the shame, the biting wind. A choked sob escaped her lips, and she struggled to sit up, her heart pounding with a sudden, disoriented panic. Where was she? Her eyes darted around the room. It was rustic and masculine, built of dark wood and stone, the walls adorned with books and well-worn leather harnesses. Her simple muslin wedding dress, now rumpled and damp, lay neatly folded over a chair by the fire. She was wearing a soft flannel nightshirt, many sizes too large. A wave of fear, cold and sharp, washed over her. She was not alone. A shadow fell across the floor, and she looked towards the doorway of the room. He stood there, a man whose sheer size seemed to fill the entire frame. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his face shadowed, his presence immense and overwhelming. It was the man the townspeople whispered about, the outcast rancher, Elijah Blackwood. He was holding a tray, and in the flickering firelight, she could see the concern etched on his rugged face. But all she saw was a stranger, a giant, and she was trapped, miles from anyone, in the heart of the storm. Fear held Clara captive, but the giant in the doorway made no move to approach. He simply placed the tray on a small table near the door, the gesture deliberate and slow. It held a bowl of steaming broth and a piece of bread. Without a word, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and retreated, pulling the door partially closed, leaving her in the warm solitude of the firelight. The act was so contrary to her fear that it left her bewildered. A captor would not offer food with such quiet deference. Days bled into one another, measured by the rhythm of the storm that still raged outside. Clara's world shrank to the four walls of the warm room. Her rescuer remained a silent, watchful presence. He would leave food, add wood to her fire, and disappear. It was the ranch's housekeeper, a wiry woman named Martha, with a face etched by seasons of hardship and hands that were never still, who finally gave the silence a voice. "He won't bite," Martha said one afternoon, her voice as raspy as dry leaves. She was changing the linens on Clara's bed with brisk efficiency. "Got the manners of a spooked bear, but he's a good man. Better than any you'll find down in that town of vipers." Over the next few days, as Clara's strength returned, Martha filled in the stark outlines of Eli's story. She spoke of Lillian, his wife, a woman who loved books and wild roses. She told of the night she died in childbirth, with the town's only doctor, Abernathy, stumbling in drunk and useless. And she spoke with a low and bitter anger of how Eli had tried to seek justice, only to be silenced by the Croft family, who had investments with the doctor and would not tolerate a scandal. "The Crofts own the silence in this town, girl," Martha finished, her knitting needles clicking like tiny, angry clocks. "Eli, he just refused to pay their price for it, so they made him an outcast." The story settled over Clara, heavy and profound. This giant, silent man was not a monster. He was a man in mourning, a man of principle living in a self-imposed exile. Every quiet act of kindness he showed her, the warm broth, the safe room, the respectful distance, was now magnified, a testament to a character forged in loss and integrity. The weight of his goodness felt like a debt she could never repay. She was a burden, another stray he had taken in, a reminder of the life and child he himself had lost. She could not bear it. She had to contribute, to earn her keep, to be more than just the woman he had saved from the snow. One morning, feeling stronger, she ventured out of her room. She found a small, dust-covered room at the end of the hall. It was a library, Lillian's library, its shelves filled with books, now sleeping under a fine layer of dust. Here, among the silent stories, Clara felt a flicker of her old self, the Philadelphia librarian. This was a language she understood. She found Eli in the barn, mending a harness with his large, capable hands. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice still unsteady. I would like to help." "The books. Your wife's books. I could put them in order. It's what I do." Eli stopped his work, looking at her for a long moment. His eyes, a surprising shade of grey, like a stormy sky, seemed to see right through her. She expected him to refuse, to send her back to her room. Instead, he gave that same slight nod she was beginning to recognize. "Lillian, Would have liked that, he said, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time he had spoken more than a single word to her. The permission felt like a gift. Back in the dusty library, she pulled the first book from the shelf. It was a collection of poetry. On the inside cover, in a delicate, fading hand, was an inscription. For my Elijah, my gentle giant, my safe harbor, all my love, Lillian. Clara traced the words with her fingers, a sudden sharp ache in her chest. She was not just organizing books. She was piecing together the ghost of a great love in the house of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to have a safe harbor of his own. The blizzard lasted 3 days, walling the ranch off from the rest of the world. When it finally broke, the landscape was a pristine, silent expanse of white under a painfully bright sun. The peace was deceptive. Supplies were low, and a trip to Solitude Creek was unavoidable. Martha's joints were acting up from the cold, and Eli refused to leave Clara alone at the isolated ranch. There was no discussion. It was an unspoken necessity that she would have to go with him. "Stay close to me," he said, as he helped her onto the wagon seat, his voice a low rumble. It was not a suggestion, but a command born of quiet concern. The town of Solitude Creek seemed to hold its breath as their wagon rolled down the main street. Faces appeared in windows, curtains twitched, and the few men on the boardwalk stopped their conversations to watch them pass. The silence was a wall of judgment, and Clara felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. She pulled her borrowed shawl tighter, wishing she could disappear. Eli's presence beside her was the only solid thing in a hostile world. He seemed oblivious to the stairs, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his jaw set like granite. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store and came around to help her down, his large hand protectively at the small of her back as he guided her through the door. The store was a blast of warmth and the smell of roasted coffee, oiled leather, and chewing tobacco. A low hum of conversation filled the air, centered around the pot-bellied stove. The moment they stepped inside, the humming stopped. It was as if a switch had been thrown. Every eye in the place, the storekeeper, the ranchers, the women picking through bolts of fabric, turned to them. Eli ignored them, moving to the counter with a list for the storekeeper. Clara, trying to make herself small, lingered near a barrel of apples. It was then that a voice, sharp and brittle as frozen lace, cut through the oppressive silence. "Well, look what the storm dragged in." Clara turned. Eleanor Croft, Silas's mother, stood near the fabric counter, flanked by 2 other women. Her face was a mask of righteous indignation. She looked Clara up and down, her eyes lingering on Clara's waist with undisguised contempt. "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face in this town, girl. We are a God-fearing community here. We don't take kindly to Eastern trollops bringing their shame to our doorstep." The word trollop struck Clara with the force of a slap. Her face burned, and the room began to swim. She felt the eyes of the entire town on her, dissecting her, condemning her. Before she could wither completely, a large shadow fell over her. Eli had moved from the counter to stand directly in front of her, shielding her from Mrs. Croft's venomous gaze. He was so tall, so broad, that he completely blocked her from view. He didn't look at Clara. He looked directly at Eleanor Croft. "That's enough, Eleanor," he said. His voice was not loud, but it had a dangerous quiet that seemed to suck the remaining warmth from the room. It was the voice of a man who had been pushed to a limit no one had dared to test for years. Mrs. Croft's face tightened. "This doesn't concern you, Blackwood. You made it my concern when you stopped her being my guest and made her your target," Eli stated, his voice flat and cold. "We'll take our supplies and be on our way. Let us be." The silent standoff was broken by the nervous clearing of the storekeeper's throat. He hurriedly finished packing their goods. As Eli paid, the silence in the store remained, but it had changed. It was no longer just judgmental. It was laced with a grudging, fearful respect. For the first time in years, someone had stood up to the Crofts, and no one knew what would happen next. Outside, as Eli loaded the last crate onto the wagon, a man approached them. It was Sheriff Brody, his face weary, his badge dulled with age. He tipped his hat to Clara before turning to Eli. "Eli," he said, his voice low, "I can't tell you how to live your life, but you're poking a sleeping bear with a very sharp stick. The Crofts don't take kindly to being challenged." Eli finished securing the load and turned to face the lawman. "Some bears need poking, Brody, especially when they start preying on folks who can't fight back." He helped Clara onto the wagon, and as they rode out of town, she looked back at the small, solitary figure of the sheriff, left standing in the street. The battle lines had just been drawn. A fragile peace settled over the Timberline Ranch in the week that followed. The quiet was a living thing, built of shared, silent meals and the unspoken acknowledgement of the lines that had been drawn in town. Clara found a sense of purpose in Lillian's library, the methodical work of cleaning and cataloguing the books, a balm to her fractured spirit. She and Eli moved around each other with a careful gravity, the space between them charged with things unsaid. She was beginning to feel safe, a dangerous and unfamiliar sensation. The peace was shattered by the arrival of a rider from the Solitude Creek Bank. He delivered a single, crisp envelope and left without a word, refusing even a cup of coffee. Clara watched from the library window as Eli took the letter, his back rigid. He stood on the porch for a long time after the rider had gone, staring out at the snow-dusted mountains, the white paper held tight in his hand. Later that evening, Clara came to the kitchen seeking a glass of water. She stopped just outside the door, hearing voices raised in a way she never had before in this quiet house. It was Martha and Eli. "They've called the loan, Elijah." Martha's voice was tight with a rare, undisguised fear. "The whole note, due in 30 days. 30 days. We'll be ruined. This is because of the girl. I told you bringing her here was asking for trouble." "The girl has a name." Eli's reply was a low growl, fierce and protective. "Her name is Clara, and this isn't her doing. This is Eleanor Croft's doing. It's a punishment for what happened in the store. A punishment we can't afford. What are we going to do?" "We'll find a way. We always do." "There's no way out of this one," Martha retorted, her voice cracking. "Not unless you send her packing. Maybe then the Crofts will be satisfied." Clara didn't wait to hear Eli's response. She backed away from the door, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The words echoed in her head. Because of the girl. Ruined. It was true. She was a plague, a walking misfortune. She had fled one life in ruins, only to bring that same destruction down upon the one man who had shown her unconditional kindness. The weight of her guilt was suffocating, far heavier than the shame she had felt in the chapel. Eli's defense of her only twisted the knife deeper. He was willing to lose everything. His home, his legacy, the ranch Lillian had loved, all for a stranger he'd found in the snow. She could not allow it. She would not be the reason for his downfall. There was only one thing to do, one way to repay his kindness. She had to disappear. That night, she lay awake, listening to the house settle into a deep slumber. The wind had picked up again, a low moan that sounded like a warning. When the old grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2, she slipped out of bed. With trembling hands, she dressed in the simple calico dress Martha had given her and packed her few meager belongings into a small bundle. On the bedside table, she left a short, tear-blotted note. "Thank you for the kindness. I am a storm you do not need to weather. This is the only way to save your home. Please, do not follow me." She paused at her door, listening. A thin line of light still shone from beneath Eli's door down the hall. He was awake, likely staring at the ceiling, wondering how to fight a battle she had brought to his door. The thought of his burden was the final push she needed. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she crept through the silent house, unlatched the heavy front door, and slipped out into the vast, freezing darkness of the Wyoming night. The cold was a shock, but this time she welcomed it. It was the price of her atonement. The cold was a thief, stealing the breath from Clara's lungs and the warmth from her blood. She hadn't gotten far from the house, perhaps only to the edge of the timberline where the dark shapes of the pines stood like silent sentinels. The moon was a sliver of ice in a black sky, offering little light and no comfort. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a nocturnal creature, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. But the fear of the wild was nothing compared to the fear of what her presence was doing to Eli. So she pushed on. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone, the next, a large shape detached itself from the deeper shadows of the trees. Her heart leaped into her throat. A bear? A wolf? "Where do you think you're going in the middle of the night, with a child in your belly?" The voice was not a shout, but a low, quiet rumble that cut through the wind. It was Eli. He wasn't angry. He sounded tired, resigned. He stood a few paces away, not moving to grab her, simply blocking her path with his sheer presence. The sight of him, so calm and solid, broke the last of her resolve. A ragged sob tore from her chest. "I have to go," she wept, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and desperation. "Don't you see? I'm a curse. I've brought nothing but trouble to you. The bank, the Crofts. Mrs. Martha was right. If I leave, they'll leave you alone. You can't lose your home because of me. You can't." He listened, his face unreadable in the faint moonlight. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by her own tears, he took a step closer. He reached out, not to touch her, but to retrieve the small bundle she had dropped in the snow. "My wife, Lillian," he said, his voice softer now. "She believed a person's worth wasn't measured by the trouble they encountered, but by how they faced it. Running from a fight isn't facing it, Clara." He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw not just pity or concern in his eyes, but a fierce, unwavering conviction. "You think leaving saves me? Oh, you think my honor is so cheap, I'd let a woman carrying a child walk into a Wyoming winter to save my finances? You think that's the man I am?" His questions weren't accusations. They were a revelation. He wasn't concerned with his ranch. He was concerned with his character, with her safety, with what was right. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're going to come back to the house," he said simply. He held out a large, calloused hand. "And tomorrow, we are going to look at my ledgers. We are going to find a way. Not me. We." The word hung in the cold air between them, a promise of something she thought she'd never have again, an alliance. She hesitated for only a second, before placing her small, cold hand in his. His grip was warm and strong, engulfing hers completely. He led her back through the snow, the silence between them no longer one of distance, but of a new, profound understanding. Back in the warm kitchen, her farewell note lay on the table, a stark white testament to her despair. Eli picked it up, read it, and then, without a word, tossed it into the firebox of the stove. He watched it curl into ash. "Your trouble is my trouble now," he said, turning to face her, his gaze steady and clear. "This ranch is your home. We will fight this together." Clara looked at the giant of a man before her, the town outcast, the silent widower. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Solitude Creek, she did not feel alone. She felt anchored. In the weeks that followed, Clara's vow to help became a quiet reality. The Timberline Ranch's office, long a place of organized solitude for Eli, now became a shared space. She sat opposite him at the large oak desk, her small, neat handwriting a stark contrast to his bold scrawl as they pored over years of ledgers. She was a librarian, a woman of ledgers and logic, and she found a grim satisfaction in tracing the financial veins of the ranch, seeking a way to fight the Crofts on her own terms. A partnership formed between them in the silent language of numbers and shared purpose. The attack, when it came, was not on paper. It came with the smell of smoke in the dead of night. Clara was woken by the frantic, terrified whinnying of horses. An angry orange glow flickered against her window. She threw on a robe and ran into the hall, nearly colliding with Eli, who was already pulling on his boots. "Stay in the house," he commanded, his face a grim mask in the unnatural light. But she saw the flicker of sheer panic in his eyes, and she knew she couldn't. The stable, the heart of the ranch, and the keeper of Lillian's legacy was ablaze. Flames licked up the dry timber walls, and thick, acrid smoke billowed into the night sky. Eli and a hastily woken Martha worked with desperate fury, throwing buckets of water and trying to lead the panicked, screaming horses out of the inferno. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt useless, a spectator to the destruction of the last beautiful thing in Eli's life. Then she saw it. In the far stall, the one closest to the spreading flames, a young foal, barely a month old, was trapped, crazed with fear, its mother rearing and pulling against her lead rope outside. The embers were starting to fall around its small enclosure. There was no time. While Eli battled a collapsing section of the roof, Clara acted. She soaked a heavy horse blanket in the water trough, her mind strangely calm amidst the chaos. Holding the wet blanket before her, she ducked under a burning beam and ran into the suffocating smoke of the stable. The heat was a physical blow. She reached the stall, her voice a low, soothing murmur, the way she used to read to children at the library. The foal, seeing her calm presence, quieted its frantic dashing. She threw the blanket over its head, shielding its eyes from the terrifying flames, and with a firm grip on its halter, she led the trembling creature out of the stall, past the licking flames, and into the relative safety of the cold night air. She emerged from the smoke, coughing, her face smudged with soot, the foal huddled against her side. Eli had just finished subduing the last of the major flames, and turned, his face a mixture of relief and fury. He saw her, and the expression on his face changed. The anger, the fear, it all melted away, replaced by something else entirely. He looked at her, this small, pregnant librarian from Philadelphia, covered in ash and holding a rescued animal, and he saw not a fragile victim, but a woman of impossible, unshakable courage. It was not pity he felt, it was awe. Later, After the last ember was extinguished and the exhausted horses were secured in a temporary corral, they sat in the kitchen. The stable was a charred skeleton, a devastating financial blow, but every animal was alive. Martha was tending to a small burn on Clara's forearm. Eli sat across from them, silent, just watching her. "The night Lillian died," he began, his voice low and rough, breaking the silence. Dr. Abernathy was so drunk, he dropped his forceps. Twice. He was laughing. The confession was stark, brutal, a secret he had carried like a cancer. "I told Sheriff Brody. I told anyone who would listen. The Crofts paid them all for their silence. I never spoke of it again. Not to anyone." He looked at Clara, his gray eyes full of a raw, unguarded pain. Until now. He was entrusting her with the heaviest piece of his soul. In the ashes of the stable, a new and profound trust had been forged, stronger and more resilient than timber. The fire, though a disaster, had cauterized a wound between them. In the days of cleanup that followed, a new rhythm took hold at the ranch. The shared purpose of rebuilding the charred stable created an easy camaraderie. Clara worked alongside Martha, cleaning and oiling the surviving harnesses, while Eli and his ranch hands salvaged timber. For the first time, Clara felt the deep, grounding satisfaction of physical labor, of seeing her efforts make a tangible difference. She felt, for the first time, like she belonged. It was nearly a month after the fire when the post rider made his way to the ranch, bringing a small bundle of mail. Among the business circulars and a letter for Martha was an envelope addressed to Clara in a familiar, elegant script. It was from her older sister, Isabel, back in Philadelphia. A hunger for a connection to her old life, a life she now viewed with a strange sense of distance, rose in her. She took the letter to the quiet of Lillian's library to read. Isabel's words flowed across the page, a perfect symphony of sisterly concern. "My dearest Clara, I was utterly horrified to receive Father's telegram, to be abandoned at the altar in such a cruel fashion. My heart aches for you. Silas Croft is a scoundrel of the highest order, and you are better off without him, though I know it cannot feel that way now." Clara's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. To be understood, to be believed. It was a balm she hadn't realized how desperately she needed. She read on, Isabel detailing their father's fury and the whispers that had even reached Philadelphia society. Then, Clara's eyes fell upon a single, innocuous sentence in the middle of a paragraph. "And for Silas to behave so monstrously, especially after he wrote to me of his plans to surprise you with that beautiful silver locket you so admired in the jeweler's window back home. It proves his heart is as false as his promises." The book in Clara's lap slipped to the floor. The silver locket. She had admired it, yes, and she had written to Isabel about it, months ago, describing how she had pointed it out to Silas. But Silas himself had never seen it. He had been 100 miles away on business that day. Clara had never mentioned it to him. The only way Silas could know about that locket was if someone had told him. The only person she had told was Isabel. The room grew cold. Clara read the sentence again and again. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Isabel's carefully chosen words, her perfect sympathy, it was all a lie. Silas had not known about her pregnancy until he arrived in Solitude Creek. Someone had to have warned him. Someone who knew her secrets. A cold dread, far worse than any she had felt before, washed over her. Her own sister, her confidant, her blood, had betrayed her. For what? Jealousy. A payment from the wealthy Crofts. The motive didn't matter. The truth was a gaping wound. She sat there for hours, the letter crumpled in her hand, the world outside fading away. The shame of the wedding was a public humiliation. This was a private evisceration. It severed the last, final thread connecting her to the life she had left behind. She was well and truly alone. Eli found her there as dusk settled, the room grown dark and cold. He lit a lamp, the soft glow illuminating her pale, tear-streaked face. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply saw the crushed letter in her fist and the profound, bottomless despair in her eyes. He pulled up a small stool and sat near her, not touching her, but filling the empty space with his solid, unwavering presence. "Family," Clara finally whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. I thought I still had family." Eli remained silent for a long moment, his gaze steady. "Sometimes," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute certainty, "the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to keep. Sometimes you have to build your own." He was not just offering comfort, he was offering a foundation. In the face of a betrayal that had left her utterly adrift, his words were an anchor. She looked at him, the man who had asked for nothing and given her everything, and knew he was right. Her family was here, in this room. The betrayal Clara suffered at her sister's hands did not break her. It forged her. The last vestiges of the timid Philadelphia librarian were burned away, leaving a woman with a quiet, steely resolve. Her place was here, on this rugged patch of land, beside this formidable man. She worked with a newfound purpose, her hands, once soft from handling paper, slowly toughening with the rhythms of ranch life. She had found her home, and she would not let it be taken from her without a fight. The fight came to them, not with the roar of a fire, but with the quiet knock of a sheriff's deputy. He handed Eli a thick packet of documents, his expression apologetic. "It's from Silas Croft's lawyer, Eli. It's official." That evening, in the lamplight of the office, Eli spread a large, hand-drawn map of the ranch across the desk. The legal papers lay beside it, their cold, formal language a blight upon the room. With a calloused finger, Eli traced the blue line that snaked its way through the property. "This is Blackwood Creek," he said, his voice grim. "It's the only water for 5 miles in any direction. It feeds the pastures, waters the horses. It's the lifeblood of this place. Without it, this land is just dust and rock." He tapped the legal document. "Silas is claiming his father bought the primary water rights from my grandfather 40 years ago. He's filed an injunction to stop our access, effective immediately." Clara looked at the map, then at Eli's grim face. "But that's impossible. You would know." "Of course I would know. My grandfather would sooner have sold his own hands than the rights to that water." "This is a lie, Clara. A fabrication. But a lie on a legal document can do as much damage as a fire if you can't prove it's false." He looked out the dark window, his jaw tight. He doesn't want the water. He knows a judge would never let him divert the whole creek. He wants to bleed us dry in legal fees. He wants to see this place wither and die. The ruthlessness of it was staggering. It was an attack designed not just to win, but to annihilate. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over Clara. How could they fight a man who could afford to bend the law to his will? Then she looked at the rows of old, leather-bound ledgers lining the office walls. 3 generations of Blackwood history, meticulously recorded. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. "You said your grandfather was a meticulous man." Eli turned from the window, a flicker of something, surprise, hope, in his eyes. "He was. Wrote down everything." "Then the proof is in this room," she stated, a librarian's certainty in her tone. "A sale of that magnitude would require a contract, a deed amendment, entries in the financial ledgers. A lie this big leaves a void where the truth should be. We just have to find that void. She stood and ran her hand along the spines of the old books. We start from the beginning. Every deed, every letter, every ledger. We don't just defend ourselves, Eli. We build a case that proves he's a liar and a fraud. A slow, grim smile touched Eli's lips for the first time that day. He looked at her, this woman who had brought a tempest into his life, and saw his greatest ally. He pulled the oldest, heaviest ledger from the bottom shelf, its leather cover worn smooth by his grandfather's hands. He placed it on the desk between them, the spine cracking as he opened it to the first page. The lamp cast their long shadows against the walls as they bent over the faded ink. They were no longer just a rancher and a librarian. They were archivists, detectives, searching for a single sentence, a forgotten signature on a yellowed page, the one small truth that could save their world from turning to dust. The days that followed were a descent into a world of dust and fading ink. They worked by lamplight late into the night, the office floor stacked with ledgers and deed boxes. A strange intimacy grew between them in their shared, desperate hunt. They were a silent, efficient team. Eli's knowledge of his family's history guided their search, while Clara's librarian's mind saw the patterns and connections he missed. Still, they found nothing. No mention of a sale, no contract. Only the vast, damning silence where a transaction of that size should have been. Hope began to fray. It was Clara who found the breadcrumb. Deep in a ledger from 1908, buried in an entry about fence repairs on the northern boundary, was a small, almost illegible note in his grandfather's hand. Materials cost shared, as per boundary agreement with Vance. Vance? Clara asked, looking up from the page. Eli's face hardened. A shadow passed over his features, extinguishing the fragile hope that had been in his eyes. Samuel Vance, the blacksmith. He said the name like an old wound. His father and my grandfather were partners in a silver claim before they settled here, grew up together. He didn't have to say more. Clara understood this was another ghost from his past. Guided by this new clue, they shifted their search from financial ledgers to property agreements. Tucked away in a tin box, they found it. A hand-drawn map of the property line adjoining the Vance homestead, and with it, a formal agreement regarding a small spring near the border. And there, at the bottom, was the key. A clause, written clearly and officially, stating that in exchange for access to the spring, the Vance family formally recognized the Blackwood family's sole and undisputed rights to all other water on their property, specifically naming Blackwood Creek. It was witnessed and signed by both of their fathers. Clara felt a surge of triumph. This is it. This is the proof. But Eli stared at the signature of Jedediah Vance, his expression bleak. This paper is only as good as the man who'll swear to its authenticity. Jedediah is long dead. Only Sam can testify that this is his father's hand, his seal. He finally met Clara's eyes, the pain stark and raw. Sam was my best friend, closer than a brother. When Lillian died, he sided with the town. He chose their silence over our friendship. I haven't spoken a word to him since. To ask for his help now was not just a legal strategy. It was an act of profound surrender, a reopening of the deepest wound of all. Swallowing years of pride and hurt, Eli rode into town the next morning, the document carefully wrapped in oilcloth. Clara watched him go, knowing this journey was harder for him than any blizzard. The blacksmith's forge was a cavern of fire and shadow, the air thick with the smell of hot iron and coal. Sam Vance hammered a glowing horseshoe on his anvil, his face grim, his powerful arms slick with sweat. He did not stop his work when Eli entered. The rhythmic, angry clang of the hammer was the only sound between them. "Sam." Eli's voice was quiet, yet it carried over the roar of the forge. Sam finished shaping the shoe, plunging it into a bucket of water with a furious hiss. He finally turned, his face a mask of guarded resentment. "What do you want, Eli?" Without a word, Eli unrolled the document on a cluttered workbench. Sam's eyes fell upon the two signatures, his father's and Eli's. He stared at the paper for a long time, his jaw working. The history, the betrayal, the shared grief, it all hung in the fiery air between them. "The Crofts are trying to steal my water," Eli said simply. "They're using a lie. This is the truth, but I need you to give it a voice." Sam looked from his father's strong, honest signature to the face of the friend he had abandoned. The hammer in his hand felt impossibly heavy. This was his chance, not just to see justice done, but to reclaim a piece of his own lost honor. He looked up, the fire of the forge reflected in his eyes. "I wasn't there for you after Lillian died," Sam said, his voice thick with a guilt he had carried for years. "I let the town's fear make me a coward. I won't do it again." He straightened, his decision made. "I'll be there for you now, Eli. I'll testify." With Sam Vance's testimony secured, a fragile sense of hope returned to the Timberline Ranch. They had a fighting chance. The hearing was set for the end of the week, and the days leading up to it were filled with a quiet, focused energy. Eli and Sam met several times, rebuilding the fractured bridge of their friendship over maps and legal papers. Clara, meanwhile, found her belly had grown more pronounced, a constant, gentle reminder of what was truly at stake. She felt a fierce, protective love for this unborn child, a love that gave her a strength she never knew she possessed. The day before the hearing, a hired carriage, gleaming with polish and utterly alien in the rugged landscape, rattled its way up the path to the ranch house. A tall, impeccably dressed man with a severe face and eyes the color of cold steel stepped out. Clara's heart stopped. It was her father, Alistair Thompson. He stormed into the house without an invitation, his gaze sweeping over the rustic interior with disdain before landing on Clara. He did not embrace her. He did not ask if she was well. "You have caused this family an unimaginable degree of shame," he began, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "I have been in correspondence with the Crofts, a respectable family. They have informed me of the situation. There is, however, a solution." He spoke as if discussing a business transaction. "You will come home. Arrangements have been made at a discreet institution in upstate New York, where you will remain until the child is born. The child will then be adopted by a suitable family. No one need ever know of its existence." Clara stared at him, speechless. The coldness of his proposal, the utter lack of love, was more shocking than Silas's public cruelty. She looked past her father and saw Eli standing in the doorway to the office, his expression unreadable, his presence a silent, solid wall at her back. "No," Clara said, the words small but firm. Her father's eyes narrowed. "Do not be a fool, Clara. This is your only chance to salvage your life, to restore our family's honor." "Honor?" The word came out as a bitter laugh. "You speak of honor. Was there honor in how Silas treated me? Is there honor in my own sister's betrayal? Is there honor in you standing here, demanding I give away my child like a misplaced parcel?" She took a step forward, her hand resting on her belly. The fear she had always felt in her father's presence was gone, burned away by the fires of the last few months. "This man," Alistair Thompson said, finally acknowledging Eli with a dismissive wave of his hand, "this rustic has clearly poisoned your mind. I am here to take you home." "I am home," Clara said, her voice ringing with a newfound certainty. Eli did not move, did not speak. He didn't need to. His unwavering presence gave her all the strength she needed to face her past. She looked her father squarely in the eye, the man whose approval she had sought her entire life, and she saw him for what he was, a hollow man, concerned only with the opinions of others. "My honor is not in a family name written in a society column in Philadelphia," she declared, her voice strong and clear. "My honor is here on this land, with the people who have shown me what the word truly means. My family is here." The finality in her voice was absolute. Alistair Thompson stared at his daughter as if she were a stranger. He saw the defiant woman she had become, and the silent giant standing behind her, and he knew he had lost. His face contorted in a mask of cold fury. "Then you are no longer my daughter," he said, the words a final, clean severance. He turned on his heel and walked out of the house, out of her life, without a backward glance. The sound of his carriage rattling away was the sound of her last bridge to the past burning to the ground. She stood in the silence, trembling slightly, and then felt a large, warm hand come to rest gently on her shoulder. The town hall was packed so tightly that the air was thick and still. It felt less like a legal hearing and more like a public weighing of souls. On one side sat Silas and Eleanor Croft, with their slick lawyer from Cheyenne, radiating an aura of untouchable power. On the other sat Eli, Clara, and Sam Vance, a small island of quiet resolve. Clara felt a sharp twinge in her lower back as she sat down, but she dismissed it as nerves. Today, all that mattered was the truth. The Crofts' lawyer was smooth and condescending. He painted a picture of a distinguished, pioneering family, being harassed by a disgruntled outcast and the fallen woman he harbored. He presented a beautifully forged document, complete with a forged signature of Eli's grandfather, that seemed to cede all water rights to the Crofts. For a moment, the room was swayed by the performance. Then Sam Vance was called to the stand. The blacksmith, a man of few words, seemed to grow in stature as he took the oath. He did not speak with legal flourish. He spoke the plain, unvarnished truth. He presented the boundary agreement his father had signed, confirmed the signature was genuine, and spoke of the decades of mutual respect between the Blackwoods and the Vances, a respect built on honest dealings. "My father would call that piece of paper you have there a lie and a disgrace," Sam said, pointing a calloused finger at the Crofts' forged document. "And so do I." His words, spoken with the weight of a lifetime of integrity, landed like hammer blows on an anvil. The tide in the room began to turn, but the true reckoning was yet to come. As the judge examined the two documents, another man rose slowly from the back of the room. It was Sheriff Brody. All eyes turned to him. "Judge," Brody said, his voice weary but clear, "I've been the law in this town for 30 years, and for most of that time, I've kept my mouth shut when I shouldn't have. I let fear of the Crofts make me a lesser man." He walked to the front, placing a worn leather ledger on the judge's bench. "This isn't about water rights anymore. It's about a sickness this town has ignored for too long." He turned to face the crowd, his gaze landing on Dr. Abernathy, who seemed to shrink in his chair. "This is my own ledger. In it are the names of 7 people, including Eli's wife, Lillian, who died under Dr. Abernathy's care when they shouldn't have. Complaints I buried. A pattern of negligence and drunkenness I ignored because the Crofts, who hold the doctor's gambling debts, told me to." A stunned, horrified silence fell over the room. The dispute over a creek had just become a trial for the soul of the entire town. Silas and his mother were no longer just landowners. They were exposed as the keepers of a corrupt and deadly secret. The judge slammed his gavel down, his face a thundercloud. This hearing is concluded. The injunction is denied. The Vance agreement stands. And Sheriff, I suggest you place Dr. Abernathy and any co-conspirators under immediate investigation. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Clara's knees washed over her. They had won. The truth had won. She turned to Eli, a triumphant, tearful smile on her face. But just as their eyes met, the smile vanished, replaced by a sharp gasp. A searing pain, undeniable and terrifying, shot through her. She clutched her belly, her knuckles turning white. "Eli," she managed to say, her voice tight with pain. "The baby. It's coming." The victorious buzz of the room dissolved into chaos. Dr. Abernathy was being led away by a deputy. Mrs. Croft was shouting at her lawyer, but Eli saw and heard none of it. His world narrowed to Clara's pale, sweat-beaded face. The terror he'd felt the night Lillian died returned, cold and absolute. He swept her up into his arms, his victory forgotten, his world once again hanging by the most fragile of threads. "Get the new doctor," he roared, his voice echoing through the pandemonium. "Now!" The world outside the new doctor's clinic ceased to exist. All the legal victories, the exposed lies, the town's reckoning, it all faded into an insignificant hum. The only reality was the small, clean room where Clara fought for her life and the life of their child. The new physician, Dr. Miller, was a calm, competent man whose quiet authority was a universe away from the bumbling negligence of Dr. Abernathy. But the danger was real. The labor was too early, and Clara was exhausted. Eli never left her side. He was a rock, a mountain, weathering the storm of her pain. He held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles, his touch a constant, grounding force. The ghosts of the past were in the room with him. He could feel the cold shadow of the night he lost Lillian. But this time, he refused to be a helpless spectator. He met Clara's pain-filled eyes and poured all of his strength, his hope, his will into his gaze. "Stay with me, Clara," he murmured, his voice low and steady, a lifeline in the tempest. "You are the strongest person I know. You fight. You hear me. You fight for us." He spoke of the future, of teaching their son to ride, of finishing Lillian's library, of planting a garden in the spring. He whispered promises, not just to her, but to the ghosts, to fate itself, refusing to accept the same tragic ending. Outside, a strange and silent miracle was taking place. The townspeople of Solitude Creek, freshly awakened from their long slumber of complicity, had gathered. They did not crowd the door or whisper gossip. They stood in a quiet, prayerful vigil in the twilight. Sam Vance was there, his wife Mary beside him, her head bowed. The storekeeper and his wife stood with a lantern. Even women who had once stared at Clara with contempt now stood with faces etched with genuine concern. It was a town holding its collective breath, atoning for its past silence with a present, united hope. Hours crawled by. The night deepened. Inside the clinic, Clara was pale, her strength waning. Dr. Miller's face was grim. For a terrifying moment, the room was filled with a desperate, straining silence. Eli's grip on her hand tightened, his heart a cold, hard knot of fear in his chest. Then a sound cut through the tension, thin, reedy, but utterly magnificent. The first cry of a newborn. It was a sound of impossible victory. Outside, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. Inside, Eli finally let go, burying his face in his hands as a wave of emotion so powerful It shook his entire frame, washed over him. Years of grief, hours of terror. It all broke free in a single, shuddering release. "You have a son, Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Miller said, his voice warm with a smile. "A small but determined fighter, just like his mother." A little while later, the doctor laid the swaddled infant in Clara's arms. He was so small, so perfect. He had a fuzz of dark hair like hers. But when he opened his eyes, they were a startling stormy grey. Eli's eyes. Clara, exhausted but glowing, looked up at Eli, who gazed at his son with a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. "He needs a name," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Eli looked at her, his heart too full for words. "I want to call him Samuel," she said softly, "for the friend who came home." She paused, then added, "And his middle name should be Liam, for Lillian." She was not just naming their son. She was healing his past. She was weaving the memory of his lost love into the fabric of their new beginning, honoring it, respecting it. Eli reached out, his large, calloused finger gently touching his son's cheek. He then looked at Clara, and the love that shone from his eyes was as vast and as bright as the Wyoming sky after a storm. Their family was born, not from a shattered vow, but from a promise kept. A year can change everything. It can turn a harsh winter of survival into a bountiful autumn of peace. The Blackwood Timberline Ranch had not only survived, it was thriving. The charred skeleton of the old stable had been reborn as a sturdy schoolhouse, its bell ringing out across the valley each morning, a cheerful sound that was the furthest thing from solitude. The town, humbled and healing, had embraced its new, competent doctor, and the Croft family's influence had withered like a vine cut at the root. But the greatest change was within the walls of the ranch house itself. It was no longer a place of quiet grief, but a home filled with the small, happy noises of a family. Little Samuel, with his mother's dark hair and his father's stormy grey eyes, had just learned to walk, his unsteady steps a constant source of wonder for the giant of a man who was his father. Eli, once a man wrapped in silence, was now quick with a low chuckle, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling with a contentment Clara never thought she'd see. And Clara, she was the heart of it all. She was no longer a guest, a refugee. She was the mistress of the ranch, a respected partner, a beloved mother. One evening, as the autumn sun began to bleed gold and rose across the Wyoming sky, Eli took her hand. "There's something I want to show you," he said, lifting a giggling Samuel onto his broad shoulders. He led them away from the ranch, up a gentle, winding path she had never walked before. They came to a small, hidden meadow on a hillside overlooking the entire valley. It was a wild, beautiful place, and growing in resilient, tangled thickets were dozens of rose bushes, their last deep red blooms of the season glowing like embers in the twilight. "Lillian planted these," Eli said softly, his voice full of memory but devoid of pain. "She said every ranch needed a place that served no purpose but to be beautiful." He looked around the meadow, then his gaze settled on Clara, and the love in his eyes was as real and as wild as the roses around them. For years, this place was a memory, a tribute to a life that was over, he said, his voice a low, earnest rumble. He gently set Samuel down, and the boy immediately busied himself chasing a butterfly. Eli took both of Clara's hands in his. "Lillian taught me how to love, Clara. I never thought I'd have that again. But you taught me how to live again. You walked out of a blizzard and into my life and showed me what courage and honor truly are. You filled this empty house with light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. He knelt before her on the soft grass. This giant of a man, humbling himself in the glow of the setting sun. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring, worn smooth with time, holding a small, deep blue sapphire. "This was my mother's ring," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a ring for a new beginning, for the Blackwood family." He looked up at her, his heart in his stormy grey eyes. "Clara May Thompson, you are the bravest, kindest, most honorable person I have ever known. You are my partner, my home. Will you marry me? Will you make this family whole?" Tears streamed down Clara's face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was the moment she never dared to dream of, a love built not on shallow promises, but forged in fire and truth. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Oh, Eli, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and drew her into his arms, their son toddling over to hug their legs. As the last rays of the sun set behind the mountains, they stood together, a man, a woman, and a child. A family not born of convenience or expectation, but built on the foundations of a second chance. They were home, in a place where wild roses grew, their future as vast and as promising as the Wyoming sky itself. And so, in a place where wild roses grow, Clara and Eli discovered that the greatest treasures in life are not the ones we seek, but the ones we have the courage to build and protect. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We have a special and simple way of hearing from our community. If this story of survival and second chances touched your heart, just comment the number 1 below. No other words are needed. It's our quiet way of knowing you were here with us. This is only one story from the heart of the frontier, and there are so many more waiting to be told. To be sure you're with us for the next tale of resilience and redemption, please subscribe to our channel. We can't wait to share the next chapter with you.